Hello, everyone. Let's wait again a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes before introducing Kevin LaGrandeur and starting for the last event of the day, his keynote.
Will I be allowed to share my screen so that I can show my?
Yes, I authorize. It's possible now.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want me to bring up my presentation now or wait until you finish introducing me?
I will introduce you very shortly in 1 or 2 minutes because it's better to give people a few more minutes to join us. Okay, let's begin by introducing you with my bad English, but according to your name, you're supposed to speak French also, but you're a professor of English.
Québécois.
Québécois at the New York Institute of Technology. And you work for many years on artificial intelligence and ethics and literature science. And you have published many papers on many different issues, the question of emotions, the question of ethics, and you're now working on the pre-modern cultural history of AI as a way of foreshadowing today's technologies. So I think it will be on these topics that you will present today, and I thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. And hopefully everybody can see the screen. Can you see it okay, Pierre? Okay, good. I see you nodding your head. So today my talk is going to be much shorter than the one that's recorded and much more broad and pan-historical. The recorded talk was more specifically on Renaissance history of AI. So I study or have written about the prehistory of AI, especially in literature. And so I'm going to talk about the full scope, and this is mostly from my book on the topic, Artificial Slaves, as the name of the book. So most of us probably think of AI as something from the 21st century and possibly the 20th, but the actual fact is that the basic idea of robots and artificial intelligence goes back thousands of years, about 3,000 years. For example, in ancient literature, the Iliad, book 18, we see Hephaestus at the very beginning of that chapter, who is the smithy god. He's working in his workroom, and he has with him as aides a bunch of golden serving maidens that he has created. And the book states that they're intelligent, they have understanding, and they're human-like in that sense. And they help him with his work, and they also help him walk because he has a bad leg. Also, in about the same period, the myths concerning Daedalus have a number of proto-AI or proto-robots embedded in the stories. There's Talos in the Greek myths, and as you know, Talos was a giant metal robot-like entity that was made to protect the island of Crete from invaders. Also, though, there were creations that Daedalus made like moving statues, which were in fact so lifelike according to Aristotle, they had to be chained down at night so that they wouldn't walk away. These stories spread to ancient China and India as well later. Aristotle talks about Daedalus in his creations and about the Iliad and the proto-robots there in his Politics in about the 300 BCE. But around the same time in China, about 250 BCE, and India, there are tales of proto-robots. The story of Yan Shi in the book, the Lietzu, talks about a magician who creates an automaton, a robotic artificial android that almost gets him killed when it flirts with the emperor's wives. In ancient India, there's a similar story about a very skilled woodworker who makes an artificial human, a female, who then serves dinner to himself and his friend. In the European late classical period, there are stories of Virgil and other people who supposedly created certain types of androids. Virgil's were called Salvatio Romea, and they're wooden robots that would ring bells to warn of revolts in the Roman provinces. Then in the medieval period, there are a number of representations of androids, artificial androids, mainly made by famous theologians who were also famous scientists. The first one is Gerbert d'Aurillac, who was Pope Sylvester II in about 1000 AD. He was a genius that he made the organ in Reims and in the cathedral there. He also brought Arabic mathematical ideas to Europe. And he was supposed to have created, there's literature saying that he created an artificial metal head that was intelligent and spoke and foretold the future. Same thing with Robert Grosseteste. There's an English medieval literary piece that talks about his attempt to create an autonomous metal head. And Albertus Magnus was supposed to have made a complete android in his laboratories, which was then destroyed by one of his pupils. And then the Renaissance, I talk about this in much more detail in my recorded talk. Around Shakespeare's time, the playwright Robert Greene wrote a play called The Honorable History of Friar Bacon and Friar Bungay. And in that play, the two friars, especially Friar Bacon, they create a talking metal head. You see it sitting on the books in this frontispiece here. This etching was in the first edition of the publication of this play in the 16th century. So the head is sitting on these books and it is animated already and is trying to speak while the two friars that made it are asleep in their chairs. They've fallen asleep waiting for it to animate. And in the end, it blows up, explodes, because they're not awake to do the right things to cause it to stay animated and to stay subservient. And that's a key thing. So the thing about these literary examples is they're influential to and influenced by, in a circular fashion, real automata in the pre-modern era. And here's one example, and there's just one. The Antikythera mechanism, which is dated to about 165 BCE, was, you see it here on the screen, is as it was found. It's a rock-encrusted gear that was found on the ocean bottom near the island of Antikythera by two Greek pearl divers in 1902. They didn't know what it was, but they knew it was something interesting, so they brought it back to Athens. It was put on a shelf there in the Athens Museum until imaging technology was developed, at which point X-rays and other images were made of the inside, and it was found to be a hand-cranked computer, an astronomical computer. And here's what it looked like when it was reverse engineered by scientists relatively recently. This is what it would have looked like 2,000 years ago. By cranking a handle on the back, you can compute the exact positions of all of the planets and planetary and astronomical bodies in the Greek universe. And also it will tell you the exact time of the next Olympiad, of the next lunar eclipse, and you can turn it to any date and it'll give you the exact positions of all of the astronomical bodies and what's happening at that date. Now, this is incredible because it was way ahead of what scientists originally thought was possible at that point. Also, in Egypt and Alexandria, starting in about 200 BCE, there were groups of Greek engineers, and they worked in concert with the Library of Alexandria, and they made all kinds of plans for automatic robotic-like mechanisms that were primitive proto-AI. Here's one example in one of the books of Huron's of Alexandria's devices. This was in about circa 50 AD. You can see in the illustration, it's a water-motivated diorama that has Hercules hitting a dragon, and the dragon spits water at him, and it's all run by water. Also in the Middle Ages, the Arabs first came up with extremely ingenious mechanical clock devices. This one is an elephant clock by Al-Jazari, made about 1200 AD. And this page is actually from a manuscript that's still extant in Istanbul in the Topkapi Palace. In the Renaissance, in Shakespeare's time, there were a bunch of engineers who made, around Europe, who made clockwork automata that did amazing things. This one is a lute player that's in the Vienna Museum now, made in the 16th century. She could, it's about half a meter high, and she can, when wound up, the gears cause her to play the lute, to walk around, and to move the head, and appear to sing. This is what the inside of that automaton looks like. These gears, I want to emphasize, were handmade to very fine specifications. So these engineers were sort of like the rocket scientists of today. So what are the symbolic values of the androids and AI in early stories? What's the point? Well, there are two symbolic values I think that are really important. One is these marvelous things show the power of the maker. They're a way to show off scientific abilities of the time. So Hephaestus, the Chinese magician, Albertus, were all considered to be extremely powerful entities, and the things that they make show their power. The other big symbolic value is the danger, though, of these devices themselves. In some instances, especially in the instance of Robert Greene's play, for instance, the inventions are religious, social, and scientific heterodox symbols in a time where orthodoxy was valued. Gerbert, Grosseteste, Bacon, all of their devices did not reflect well upon these people, but instead reflected on their unorthodox methodology of doing things and how dangerous they could be to orthodoxy. So that's it for my presentation. For more details, besides the presentation I recorded for today, you can also see my book, Artificial Slaves, and my articles on my website, which is at nyt.academia.edu, or you can just Google me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was very short as we decide not to have very long Zoom session because the experience proved it was so tiring. We decided to have very short ones, but we have maybe a few minutes for questions, and we'll of course listen to your full presentation and look at your website. The link is on your bio, I think. Yes, there was a first question from Carol, I think. No,
I was just applauding. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks, Kevin. Amazing as always.
Thank you. Yeah, these symbols on speaking of symbols, the symbols on Zoom are confusing.
So feel free to
But
Well, I
Jim.
think the
made
thing I didn't
us-
get to talk about was the linkage between those ancient sorts of automata and today. But I think the coupling is, or the linkage is one of the dangers, the perils and promise of human technology. And I talk about that in some detail in my book at the very end.
What should be your first example of some impact or reuse of Renaissance motif in today's fiction or in today's narrative of AI?
Well, I think, you know, if you start with Aristotle in his Politics, in his conversation about slavery, the reason he contemplates automated technology, he wants to make intelligent technology, it's a dream of his to get rid of slaves because slaves are problematic. So what we have is artificial slaves, the title of my book. And I think we have continued that tradition all the way through history of trying to create artificial servants who will do the jobs that we don't like to do, that are dirty or dangerous or just boring. And so a good example of that in today's fiction is Philip K. Dick's Blade Runner, or the book form is To Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. In the book, in that story, humans make androids as artificial servants, slaves, to take with them to other planets so that these artificial slaves will do the work that mules can do on Earth. And what happens is they therefore, as with any slave, they denigrate them as subhuman, when in fact the humans themselves are questionably, possibly subhuman. They can't even, in the first chapter of the book, Rick Deckard and his wife, the hero, are arguing, and they can't manage to argue without using what's called a mood organ to influence their moods, because they don't have moods anymore because they've become so polluted by modern technology and modern life. So they use this mood organ, they dial up moods. I want to be angry, they press a button for angry. So in actuality, ironically, technology has overtaken humans and has made them more robotic as the androids have become more human. And I think, you know, that's an important modern text, because there's a lot of that kind of thing, you know, Terminator, the movie we all know about, even Ex Machina. We have, you know, an example there of a very human-like robot that seems ideal as a sort of servant, except that it turns out she has her own personality and her own mind, and then becomes homicidal to become free.
There was one question in the chat, and Marida, you had also one question, so feel free to begin. Open your mic.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for this presentation. I wonder if even the idea that they were a way to show off, so to demonstrate the capabilities of the creator developers. I wonder if it doesn't still apply actually, because in many cases we can say that you know, more recent AI application actually works as a demo for, you know, other technological advances. So
Yeah,
what
that's
do
a
you
great
think?
point.
Is there another you know, bridge we can see with between the prehistory and the actual days?
Yeah, I think the bridge is absolutely there. I mean, that's a good point. Elon Musk is a good example. You know,
Exactly.
Bill Gates, these people have big egos. I mean, I don't mean that in a negative sense. You know, a lot of people who invents things, they have big egos. That's what makes them invent things. But also the danger of those inventions is also being worried about by those same people. Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Bill Joy, the initiator of a company called Sun Microsystems that runs most of our computers, all of them have talked in apocalyptic terms about AI's danger to humanity. Elon Musk, as a matter of fact, his company Neuralink, which is making what's intended to be a Wi-Fi antenna that's implantable in the human brain, his whole idea for that is that eventually we'll be as smart and able to compete with AI for jobs. He thinks that if we don't have embedded technology, we're going to become irrelevant to AI in the future. So I mean, they at one time create these things and then they say, oops, you know, now we're in danger.
Thank you.
There was now a question from Nicole.
Yeah, thank you very much for that very interesting talk. I was just wondering if that, so your analysis and what you explained, that shows a lot also about humans, not about the robots, the slaves, but how humanity is perceived. And it's a lot about questions of control, of hierarchy, let's say, of regulation. And yeah, I'm not sure, but I think there is a change coming about when we have a look at 21st century fiction and creation in fiction, like Machines Like Me, Ian McEwan, and also Ishiguro, Clara and the Sun. It's not so much about control anymore, about slaves, but it's about companions, friends, and how we interact with artificial creation and creatures, very different to classical science fiction narratives of the 20th century, or like Frankenstein in the 19th century. Doesn't that show, what do you think, doesn't that show something about our, let's say, relationship towards artificial intelligence, that there is some kind of change that is reflected, let's say?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely on target there. And I think it's very cultural specific. In the 21st century, for instance, the Japanese are much more interested in companionship from AI, in part because their demographics, you know, they have a shrinking population of young people. So they have a stated goal of trying to create AI that will interact with older people. You know, they have all kinds of robots that do this, like Paro, which is like looks like a baby seal. And, you know, so they tend to have more friendly narratives, I think, about AI than, say, Americans. Americans tend to have a love-hate relationship with automation. You know, we fear it taking our jobs, for instance, but we also are intrigued by it. And it's interesting, we don't produce as many humanoid or animal type of AI as the Japanese do. So I think you're right, but I think it's cultural specific.
There's also a question from Nicoletta Kirinska. You can. Okay, so Kevin, Nicoletta was asking why. Yes. So
in chat.
Hello.
Yeah, it would be better with your voice.
Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. So why do you think the artificial creatures are almost always have the negative image for the humans? We are always afraid of them. Why? Because they are more performant than us, because they are more beautiful, because they are smarter. What is your opinion about this?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot in my writing. I think it has to do with the Hegelian dialectic. You know, Hegel talked, and I'm simplifying Hegel here, but he talked about the fact that, and Karl Marx used this idea, that you know, there's people with lots of power and people with little power, and those who have power force everybody else to work for them. But when they do that, they get lazy and they get out of practice working, so that the slaves actually become more adept at everything. And then there's a dialectical reversal. The people who are slaves become the masters. And I think that's what we're really afraid of at a deep level, a sort of archetypal level, is that that the things we make will supersede us in power.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, Marie, ouvrez votre micro, voilà.
Yes. About that question, I think it's maybe a bit pessimistic, but I think it's also in human nature to like hate what is different. Like it's the base of the racism. It's the base of many incomprehension in between countries and cultures and everything. So it's the same with artificial creatures. Like they have their own dialogue that maybe at a point we won't understand, and so it creates fear, and it creates hate, and it creates and also that fact of domination and submission and being more powerful and everything, and it's a whole thing, I think, which creates fear and hate.
Yeah, and I think also you're bringing up a good point, which is that to some extent we're creating alien species, or the potential of alien species, because we create androids or AI in our image. But once a lot of computer scientists say that if AI gets to the point and computers get powerful enough that AI can make other AI, then the creation of AI will be exponential growth, and they'll become exponentially smarter. And at that point, they become an alien intelligence to us. We won't even have any kind of way of understanding each other. And that is something that's very frightening to people who think about that, I think. This all goes to, by the way, an idea of mimesis that we talked about. Carol ran a conference on this just 2 weeks ago, which I think mimesis figures in here a lot.
Thank you again. Has the problem of the past shed light on our current ethical issue? I'd like to ask you shortly, what happened after the Renaissance about the idea of artificial intelligence and its archaeology?
Yeah. Well, it exploded. That's why I stopped. I stopped writing about it after the Renaissance because there was so much. There's a lot of good books about that. Edison's Eve is a good book. There's a bunch of books about the automata created in the 18th century, especially. Blaise Pascal created a really interesting computer. I've seen it actually at the museum here in New York City. That could automatically calculate things. It never got reproduced. There was just the prototype. Also, you have all of these human automata in the 18th century that were put on display as curiosities, and people would pay to see them, like the mechanical duck created by Jacques de Vaucanson. There's a bunch of them in the museum in, I think it's Geneva. No, Neuchâtel has a museum just for these automata. And there's a whole bunch of them from the 18th century. Little boy who writes letters when you wind it up, and a woman that plays the piano. So there's lots of books about this stuff because it became, well, the most famous is the Mechanical Turk that would play chess, which was a fake automaton. There was actually somebody inside of the mechanism making the chess moves. But it became, all of this became much more talked about even before Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yes. It's a long story that you made very short, and thank you for this kind of synthesis. Yes, thank you. And yes, the case of Vaucanson is of particular interest for us because it was also the first revolt against kind of artificial intelligence, but against the automatization of the work. Olga had a question too. You can open your mic.
Okay. Hi, thank you for your talk. And it's I'm also from New York, and I could not attend everything from the morning. But my question is, first, I recently became a witness of women, like in 50s, 60s, became hysterical in the store when she should pay for what she bought, because people left and she should pay for it, and she became just hysterical. She probably, and it was I also usually in this store very uncomfortable, because you hear like orders, do this, do that, and it's multiple orders. It's not just put your card there, put your items here, and these I start to think, do we already probably need psychotherapy? Do we already became as society too anxious about all of this? Probably we already need some kind of psychological adjustment. We're talking about AI mostly, how it became smart, how it became that, but how we became anxious, what we should do with us. Probably we should really restrict and understand, we want slaves, we are lazy, we don't want to do, and we do. Maybe we just should become honest in all these problems.
Well, as a matter of fact, in this morning's New York Times on the front page, there is a story about a chat bot that's invented specifically to be a therapy bot for people who have COVID anxiety. So yes, we already have therapy bots, and so I'm not sure if what you're talking about is. I think what you're talking about is the automation, how automation irritates people in New York City. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, well, if I'm going to check my own food out, if I'm going to get the price of my own food, why don't I get paid to be an employee of the store? So, I mean, I understand. But the fear, I think we have both fear and marvel. I study AI a lot, and I think it's phenomenal, very interesting, possibly very helpful, could bring us to a post-human realization of some, of maybe becoming a better species. But I think only if we're really careful about how we instigate AI. So I think the fears and anxieties are also real. I mean, if the fears and anxieties were stupid, people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking, they would not talk about existential crises brought on by AI. So, I think there are good reasons for both. And I think the answer is intelligent regulation. So I'm going to put in my my concluding remark there. I agree wholeheartedly with Asaf and his partner, who were talking about this earlier.
Thank you. If there is no other question, maybe it's time to thank again Kevin, and we will meet again tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock Central European Time. Thank again, and have a look at the full presentation of Kevin online as soon as you can. Bye-bye.